Hello and welcome to Saint-Rémy-de-Provence. My name is Judy and I love history, travel, and finding out what makes people and civilizations tick. Saint-Rémy is a charming historic town in southern France, known for its nearby Roman ruins, Provençal culture, and its association with Nostradamus, a 16th century French astrologer and physician known for his cryptic prophecies, and more recently for an even more famous resident, Vincent van Gogh, who painted many of his most famous work while he was treated for mental illness in a nearby asylum. It's small enough to visit the city in just one day on foot, so walk along with me, the Armchair Traveler, as your guide. The area around today's Saint-Rémy was a small Celtic settlement, not even a town, which existed here as early as the 6th century BCE, but which didn't draw much attention from the Roman legionaries who arrived in the area in the 2nd century BCE. They chose to settle south of town in a hilltop settlement called Glanum, which we visited earlier. The link is in the description box below. This was Gallia Narbonensis, which included most of the south of today's France. The Romans managed to rule and administer this area as a single province in the late 2nd century, and it became a vital cultural and economic link between Rome and the rest of Gaul. The province was actually pretty close to Italy, which meant it was quickly Romanized, and it was sometimes even referred to as Provincia, which is where the modern term Provence comes from. Roman Provence covered about 13,000 square miles and was quite hilly. The Romans would have garrisoned the area with somewhere between 5,000 and 10,000 legionaries once the area had been pacified. They picked spots for their fortifications quite carefully. They controlled the area, the trade routes, and the people. They didn't need to settle in every previously occupied hilltop fortress. What we call Saint-Rémy today didn't make the cut. Saint-Rémy did emerge in the late Roman and early medieval period after the fall and abandonment of Glanum. The Romanized settlers abandoned their city after it was attacked, and they moved here. Saint-Rémy inherited the people in a strategic location close to the Roman road. The area grew into a fortified medieval settlement, complete with narrow winding streets and plenty of places to get lost, as you can see in this Google Earth image. Fortifications like city walls didn't come until the 14th century, and they were for protection. In the 14th century, Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, like many other towns in Europe, needed those walls to guard against various threats. This period was marked by political instability, frequent conflicts, and the threat of invasions. Modern Saint-Rémy is mostly a tourist town, doing its best to promote itself as a cultural and artistic haven and center, and is having quite a bit of success doing it. It's tying its fortunes quite closely to the most famous artist who ever lived in the area, Vincent van Gogh. Van Gogh never actually lived inside the city. He had had a mental breakdown while he was staying in Arles, less than 15 miles away, and voluntarily committed himself to an asylum just south of town. We'll visit there toward the end of our walk. Saint-Rémy-de-Provence, like many rural towns in France, experienced a great decline during the 19th century. Several things affected it. Small farms found themselves increasingly unable to compete with industrialized agriculture. The phylloxera epidemic, which devastated vineyards across all of France in the late 19th century, significantly hurt local grape culture, leading to even more economic hardship for the wine producers. Meanwhile, France's economy shifted toward more industrialization. Economic activity and employment opportunities were concentrated in larger cities like Marseille and Lyon. Many people left the small towns for better job prospects elsewhere. Even worse, railway networks in France connected major cities quite efficiently and still do, but smaller towns like Saint-Rémy often found themselves bypassed, limiting their economic prospects. To this day, there's no train station here. To visit, you either take a bus or drive. Driving is the easier alternative, but remember, there were no cars in the 19th century or for a good time into the 20th. Saint-Rémy needed an economic kickstarter and set out to refashion itself as an arts mecca. Van Gogh was starting to be recognized in the early 20th century, and his works were shown in salons in Paris, starting around the time he left Saint-Rémy. Some of Vincent's most famous works were painted while he lived nearby, but none of them featured the town itself, perhaps because he never lived in the town. Vincent may have been ill, he was quite ill, but his time here was extremely productive. During his year-long stay, he created about 150 paintings and another 100 drawings and sketches. Most of his work in this period focused on still lifes and landscapes, including wheat fields, olive groves, cypress trees, and the nearby Appalachian Mountains. Unlike Arles, where he painted the city cafe and streets, his Saint-Rémy paintings are more rural and nature-focused. Increased interest in Van Gogh and his work led to the development of various attractions, including museums, guided tours, and exhibitions, all designed to attract the visitors interested in the artist's life and work. One of them is called the Van Gogh Trail. It begins downtown in the Place Jean Jaurès and finishes up at the Saint Paul Monastery. The trail has 21 reproductions showing Van Gogh's interpretations of what he saw at each location, or sometimes nearby, along with excerpts of letters to his mother, the many letters he wrote to his brother, and a few others. Since my visit, the builders of the trail have added a nature app. That wasn't available when I was there last time. I had to content myself with signboards like this one. This marker features a view of an olive grove, complete with a bright yellow sun. The painting happens to be one of my favorites. I have a large format reproduction displayed in my own home. Medieval France was by no means monolithic in its views of Christianity, and that gave rise to all manner of variations. Some were from the past and kept, others were from the past and condemned. Some were even considered heretical. This indecisiveness allowed a man named Nostradamus, who was born here in Saint-Rémy in 1503, not just to survive, but to thrive. He was a 16th century French physician and then astrologer who was known for his cryptic prophecies, which some believed predict future events. Nostradamus originally worked as a doctor, gaining recognition for treating plague victims. Doctors avoided and priests frequently abandoned plague victims out of fear of infection. The 16th century had limited medical knowledge, but they understood that the plague was highly contagious and very dangerous with no known cure. In his willingness to treat and deal with the patients, he was an exemplary human being. Later on, he turned to astrology, writing cryptic verses that some people have interpreted as foretelling major historical events, including wars, revolutions, and natural disasters. In the Middle Ages, astrology was taken far more seriously than today and could figure into everything from medicine to farming. At the same time, the Catholic Church viewed practices like astrology, divination, and soothsaying as attempts to manipulate the future or gain knowledge that only God should possess. As a result, people engaging in fortune-telling could face severe punishment, including excommunication, imprisonment, or execution. You might be wondering how Nostradamus managed to avoid being burned at the stake. The answer is that Nostradamus was one sharp cookie. He was very careful in how he presented his work, and he had influential patrons. His little poems were vague enough that they could be interpreted to mean whatever the reader chose, and there was the problem for the authorities. Unlike others accused of heresy, he did not challenge the Catholic Church or its teachings. His poems were difficult to interpret as outrightly heretical or dangerous. If others, and it always was others, somehow interpreted them in heretical ways, including the Catholic Church, that was on them, not him. He had powerful supporters as well, including Catherine de' Medici, the Queen of France, who admired his work and even asked him to her court as an astrologer. His background as a physician and his reputation for treating plague victims also gave him some credibility. Nostradamus had quite a following outside of France, especially in Italy, England, and later on Germany and Spain. His reputation as a prophet spread throughout Europe thanks to the printing press, which helped distribute his book widely. There is speculation that Queen Elizabeth I may have been aware of his prophecies, and English occultists later took an interest in his writings. Nostradamus has a significant following to this day in the United States, particularly among conspiracy theorists, occult enthusiasts, and those interested in prophecy. His predictions are frequently referenced in books, documentaries, and are even seen displayed on late-night TV, especially when major global events occur before there is a rational explanation for them. Hotel Estrine was constructed in 1748 for the Princess of Monaco. It deserves examination just for its architecture, although that seems to play second fiddle to its goal to serve as a focus of Vincent van Gogh. It is, however, an exceptional example of 18th century Provençal style architecture, featuring a cut stone facade with 3 stories. 2 key ideas guided that renovation. They wanted to strengthen the architecture in the spirit of the 18th century building, but they also wanted to put in facilities and plan for public traffic for reuse as an art center. Work began in 1988 and was financed almost entirely by private philanthropy. It was completed about a year later. The building opened its door as an art center in 1989. Since 2007, the building has been called the Musée Estrine, which is dedicated to 20th and 21st century painting and graphic arts, with a particular focus on Vincent van Gogh and his effect on the development of the art world. Unfortunately, there is a catch, at least so far as Vincent was concerned. The museum has been able to acquire a reasonable collection of art, some of it either Van Gogh-like or at least presenting the same subjects as the master, but owns not a single original. Having originals of the artist you celebrate isn't unique, as you'll see when we visit Monet's estate in Giverny, which has not one original Monet inside. However, given the heavily promoted association, I don't think it's unreasonable for a visitor to imagine he or she would be viewing the work of the master. This quotation from a disgruntled visitor who thought about it expresses it best, although perhaps isn't being quite fair. A museum dedicated to Van Gogh without any paintings by Van Gogh is both disappointing and depressing. St. Martin's is a beautiful church on the edge of the old town. The church is dedicated to St. Martin of Tours, and it features a fresco of him inside. The original building dated back to 1122, but it has been substantially modified, expanded, enhanced, and rebuilt on several occasions, the most recent in the 19th century after there was a partial collapse. Despite the engineering issues, workmen did manage to salvage the bell tower. They then decided on a neoclassical update, a major exterior facelift of the facade, adding a pediment and the columns that you see today. The statue on the facade is a bit of a mystery, at least to me. I thought it would be St. Martin, except Martin is usually shown as a Roman soldier, often on horseback. This looks more like a priest or a bishop, and it could be St. Martin, because he was a priest, but perhaps it's Saint-Rémy. Saint-Rémy was a 5th century bishop best known for converting and baptizing Clovis, who became the first king of the Franks to become a Christian. His influence helped establish Christianity in what would become France, earning him a revered place in the country's religious history, and he is the patron saint of the city. You've actually seen this neoclassical front style before, and probably closer to home. This part of the facade bears a striking resemblance, at least superficially, to the First United Methodist Church of Lexington, Kentucky, where my sister was once a member. Saint Paul de Mausolée is probably most famous for its later life as a psychiatric hospital, but its story is actually much older. Its location is just across the modern road from Glanum, an important Roman imperial-era settlement. We don't know what was here before the monastery was built in the 12th century. The ground here may have housed Roman villas and estates, or it might have just been farmland. The current structure was dedicated to St. Paul. The word mausolée is linked to the Latin word mausoleum, which refers to a tomb or burial structure. In its prime, this establishment would have been much larger than what we see today, and it included extensive fields, olive groves, gardens, and orchards. This evacuation plan is the closest I could come to finding of a layout of the building. You can see the cloister in the center. The facade, shown here and in one of Vincent's many paintings, including himself, is simple and unadorned, typical of Romanesque architecture, emphasizing strength and stability. Vincent also captured views of the adjoining gardens or fields in these two paintings. The grounds in the cloister are pretty and have always been considered calming, which was probably one factor figuring into converting it into a mental asylum in the 1800s, although what passed for the treatments of the mental patients was far less calming and tranquil. As you enter through the main gates, you come upon a statue of the most famous inmate or resident of the asylum, Vincent himself. This statue only dates from 1989 and was put up to mark the 100th anniversary of his death. It shows Vincent holding a large sunflower. The setting is meant to serve as a reminder of the place where Vincent actually did find solace and inspiration. Inside the building, you'll find a central garden or cloister, a square courtyard common in monasteries. It's surrounded by arched galleries supported on stone columns. This area would have been a quiet retreat for the monks, and later on a therapeutic space for the patients. It would have been a pleasant place to sit, either in the garden area or, if it were hot or rainy, under the shade of the surrounding colonnade. Vincent van Gogh had mixed feelings about the care he received at Saint-Paul-de-Mausolée. In a letter to his brother, he mentioned that the people here were kind and well-meaning, but he clearly had some doubts about the effectiveness of their treatments. Whatever ailed the artist, and I'm quite sure a literature search would reveal dozens, if not hundreds, of PhD dissertations on the subjects, the doctors of the day didn't understand it and truly didn't know how to treat, much less cure him. The treatment that seemed to help the most may have been taking away his absinthe, which had a hallucinogen mixed in with the alcohol, and waiting out his agitated periods. Sometimes he was dunked into cold water, hoping either to shock him out of his agitation or bring him out of a funk. Perhaps the second most helpful thing they did was allow him to paint, mostly in solitude. He was permitted on good days to go outside the building through various hallways, like this one. During his stay, he enjoyed use of 2 rooms, one a studio, shown here on the left, and a separate bedroom. My photos clearly show the bars on the windows. Despite the harshness of his treatments, Van Gogh did continue to work while at the asylum. This was one of the most productive periods of his life. He produced many famous paintings during his stay, like Starry Night and Irises, which show his ability to continue his creative work even in terrible circumstances. After about a year, Vincent seemed to be somewhat improved, and with the support of his brother Theo, who was footing the bills, left the asylum and turned northward to Paris. It would prove to be a disastrous move that led, one way or another, to his death, but for now, he's leaving the asylum feeling hopeful, and so should we. Come back next time for another adventure with me, the Armchair Traveler, as your guide. Thank you for traveling with me today. This year, we'll be making a grand tour of France. Not just the famous cities, although we'll hit them too, but some lesser known gems. The basis of all my French posts is my personal on-the-ground visits, extending over a period of more than half a century. I took a lot of pictures, I asked a lot of questions, and I tried to write down the answers. Things change, even in a puny human lifetime, and most French cities are considerably older than I am, so a great deal of research goes into each one of these presentations. Most of that work never makes it into the videos except as an incidental reference or a mention. You might wonder what happens to the rest of it. Well, I write it down, and sometimes, if it seems interesting enough, and I admit that is a matter of taste, I write it up and post it separately. If you want to know more, check the description box below. I'll put in links from time to time for more information. Sometimes this will be information I dug up, other times it'll be links to what I hope are honest, reputable sources. In addition, I have a travel blog, a health and wellness blog, because travel is easier if we're healthy, and can be found on Blue Sky and Facebook. The addresses are all to the side of this video. Finally, I have a favor to ask. If you enjoyed my post, please like, subscribe, and share. This will help my channel grow. Thank you, and keep on traveling.